Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. Let's go. My guest this week is living proof that you can bounce back from life-threatening illness and make massively successful transitions through careers. Robert Cujo Teschner, former colonel in the United States Air Force, F15 pilot, F22 pilot, and then having faced a really life-threatening condition, which he'll talk quite extensively about in the podcast, he transitioned out of the US military and has made the most incredibly successful transition as a civilian. He founded and is the chief executive of the VMax Group, a leadership training organization that predominantly trains corporates, mainly in the United States, but also elsewhere. He's a very successful speaker. He was Vistage Speaker of the Year in 2022, and he's also written a couple of books. So he is a one-man huge success story. And to boot, he's a fighter pilot, and that meant we had a fantastic conversation, which we thoroughly enjoyed. I really hope you do too. And without further ado, let's get to it. Cujo, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's really, really great to have you on board. I'm delighted to have the chat. I think talking to a fellow Air Force officer, a fellow fighter pilot from another nation, which we've worked so closely together over the years in terms of our nations, although you and I have never done that. I'm just really looking forward to what I think will be a great discussion.
Yeah, Bob, ditto everything. Thank you so much for reaching out. And you're 100% right. Minus one little piece, there's a decent chance that somewhere along the lines, we crossed in the skies, didn't realize it even, and we're working alongside one another, just given how long both of us were doing that magnificent job. And so it's great to now be speaking with you directly in this format. This is fun.
Yeah, you probably shot me down on some training exercise or other. That's true, actually, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah, or vice versa.
You've had a fabulous career. I mean, both in the USAF with everything you did, and now obviously founder, CEO of the VMax Group, and obviously all of that US, but also working abroad as well. I mean, you're a best-selling author. You're a Vistage Speaker of the Year in 2022. I'm in awe, really. It's quite a journey. We're going to get into more depth about the whole leadership thing, because that's obviously what I want to talk to you about quite a lot. But your career journey, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a bit of a summary, that'd be really handy.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And the short summary is that you're looking at probably the least likely guy to ever fly a high-performance fighter aircraft. I grew up not playing sports, did play violin, classical violin, piano since I was a little tot. Really interested in reading books, read tons of them. Was not very popular in high school because I didn't do any of the cool things. Was captain of the speech and debate team, for crying out loud, my senior year. And I was a stick figure coming out of the Air Force Academy, 145 pounds, soaking wet, which as we look at pictures every now and again, the kids see the pictures of me back then. They're like, how in the heck did you get into a line of work that was so punishing? And then what happened to you since then? So what I can say is, and it's always hard to accept people's accolades. Thank you for your service. We get that a lot here on this side of the pond, because I got a chance to live my childhood dream. And I'm one of the few people that can say without any doubt whatsoever, I got to live what that was implanted on my soul as a 4-year-old boy who, coming out of the movie theater on the heels of seeing Star Wars, knew exactly what he wanted to do. And that was to be the, earthbound equivalent of Luke Skywalker and to fly something cool like an X-Wing. And so I knew from the very ripe age of 4 that was the trajectory that I wanted to be on. And it was only reinforced when the movie Top Gun came out in '86. And I got a chance to see that film at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. And at the time, that was a base of U.S. Air Force F4 and F16 pilots. And at the base theater, when that movie ended, they were all up on their chairs yelling and hooting and hollering. And there was just such a joy in that theater. And I'm like, yep, this is exactly what I want to do. So I got the opportunity to go to the Air Force Academy at a time when there weren't that many pilot slots. We were changing strategy collectively in the NATO alliance on the heels of the fall of the Soviet Empire, and managed to eke out a pilot slot and start on this journey of living my childhood dream. And it was everything that I hoped it would be, and then some. And it started, Bob, at Euronato Joint Jet pilot training in Wichita Falls, Texas.
Oh, nice.
Which was such a great place to be because the NATO alliance is there. And oh my goodness, the opportunity to train alongside all the partner nations in NATO that chose that as their place to train was so much fun. We had such a fun time learning how to fly, and that reinforced everything that I had hoped would be the case. And I knew that I was in the right spot. So I got a chance to live my childhood dream. Got a chance coming out of Shepherd Air Force Base to pick the airplane that I wanted. I got to pick the F-15 C model Eagle air-to-air version of the venerable F-15, and off I was to the races, and I never looked back. In fact, I long believed that I existed on this earth to be a fighter pilot. I've subsequently changed that determination, but for sure, fighter pilot was baked into my DNA from a very early age.
Nice. The Top Gun thing really amuses me because I was in Germany when Top Gun came out, and yeah, we all went and saw it, and it was just, notwithstanding the inevitable Hollywoodization of it and the kind of over dramatization, the both films actually, I think the more recent one too. I mean, they've just got some fabulous flying, and they're really, I mean, people often say, "Oh, how realistic or unrealistic is it?" And actually, my view is a lot of it is not that unrealistic. I mean, there's clearly some really good real flying. There's some really good stuff where actually some of the comms and things like that are very, very familiar and very accurate. Yeah, fine, they've embellished it a bit, but that doesn't matter. It still makes for a great movie or a great pair of movies, and fantastic. And I think motivationally, as you say, for an awful lot of people, either whether they were already in the Air Force or just about to join, it was one of those things that was a bit of a deal swinger probably for a few people.
There's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. And I'm the same way. When people ask me about the accuracy, my answer is I don't even care, because what it ultimately does is it shed light on a facet of our militaries that it's hard to capture accurately. It's very difficult to get a sense of the forces that are inflicted on the body and how fast things are happening and how far away distant objects suddenly are merging with you at 1,000 miles an hour or whatever the equivalent is. And I mean, and both of those movies do a really good job of giving us a sense of the ethos and what it takes to survive and dominate in that world. And it inspired.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, clearly for the US Navy, I mean, it must have been a major, they must have been patting themselves on the back all the way, really, with going, because I'm sure there was lots of, knowing the way these organizations work, there would have been an awful lot of nervousness about, do we want to do this? Could it go wrong? What are the risks? Are we going to blow our reputation? And of course, it's a totally iconic film, and then everyone was just eagerly anticipating the sequel for years and years and years. And I mean, I have to say, hats off to Tom Cruise. He's a pilot himself, so he understands it, and he was clearly very, very pushy about exactly what he wanted and how he wanted it to be portrayed, and to put it all in the best light. I think that was terrific, because they did do a fabulous job. Equally, I don't know, interestingly, on a totally different tack, have you seen Masters of the Air?
I have. I love Masters of the Air.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting, because I mean, again, particularly speaking from this side of the Atlantic, you can argue about some of the history, because there's a few things in there that perhaps as history buffs would seriously question. But one of the things I think it did fantastically well was portray the horror of it, and the scale and the enormity of the losses and the kind of injuries and damage that these guys took. And it was the same for RAF Bomber Command, where obviously they lost half of it, 55,000 men killed in Bomber Command out of 110,000 that were in there. And it's just extraordinary. I think some of this stuff where it actually provides that kind of window into the reality of it is a really good thing when they do it. And it's a great example.
It is. And it was a testimony to how gutsy those aviators were, and how much courage they had, and how much integrity they had going out there and launching out on missions where they knew that most of them would not return from. And yet they did it. In fact, my wife cried watching Masters of the Air. I cried watching Masters of the Air. And it was all tied to, I mean, I prayed that I could have had the guts that those aviators had back in the day, I'll never know because I was never tested the way that they were. But to watch them go up there and stick with it and to keep on doing over and over and over again, it's just a testimony to that entire generation of the grit and determination that they had to do something so epically magnificent as to go forth knowing that they're probably not coming back and yet doing so correctly. Amazing.
Yeah, totally with you. I mean, interestingly, only a couple of months ago, I had the absolute privilege to interview a chap called Colin Bell, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, Distinguished Flying Cross, who is a 103-year-old World War II Mosquito pilot who is sharp as a tack, physically and mentally. He's actually coming to the States. He's in the States in February of this year, 25. He's doing speaking tours at 103. And and his recall and obviously recognition and actually his comments about both obviously Bomber Command but also the US. We talked a bit about about that and just the courage of everyone involved on particularly on the daylight missions and things. Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, we had big shoes to fill for all of that.
Oh, in a huge way, huge shoes to fill, and it just goes back to those folks. They set the bar so high. It's so amazing to be in their orbit. The fact that you've had an opportunity to interview one of them, oh my gosh, brings a tear to my soul. That's so wonderful. And may we never forget the honor that they projected and how well they defended your great land and how together we ultimately kind of get rid of that evil from mainland Europe that had to be eradicated using those methodologies. It's just stunning. And thank you to all of them. Just a huge word of thanks.
I agree. As you know, I had the privilege to fly on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight for a couple of years, flying Spitfires and Hurricanes. And I mean, that's 20 years ago. So in those days, there were quite a lot more veterans alive, both bomber crews and fighter crews. And it was always really, really interesting and emotional to talk to them. I mean, the thing that was fascinating for me was that the fighter guys were like you and me. They were, fighter pilots love talking about fighter pilots and flying, and we're never short of a conversation. And they were just the same. They were absolutely the same. The bomber guys were, it's not a universal truth, but most of them were quite closed because they'd been through such horrific experiences, and and they'd also been, certainly this side of the Atlantic, they didn't get particularly treated well after the war. Took years to give a Bomber Command clasp to the medal that we awarded over here. It took years as well. I mean, literally only I don't remember 10, 15 years ago, we actually opened the Bomber Command Memorial for them, and that was a lot of that was because there were people who were going, well, Harris's strategy was wrong. We're bombing cities, and this was just awful. And of course, it's total war. I mean, that's the reality. If you're in that space, you're fighting a war of national survival. The game changes inevitably. And I really felt sorry for the individuals that were caught up in that. I mean, the politics is the politics, but it's very unfortunate when we drag people into that.
That's right. I mean, and these were kids. I mean, you just think about the ages involved. These are folks that were just responding to the call of the nation to go try to protect and do the seemingly impossible at the time, defeat this overwhelming army. And they did it at whatever cost. And it's no surprise to see that they're closed off and guarded. It does something. I mean, we glamorize, we talk about Top Gun and we talk about how exciting it is. And there is something about the Hollywoodization of war. It glamorizes it to a point and makes it seem, especially when it's very clear who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, at least in the portrayal, oh, yes. But the practical reality of it is it's an absolute mess and it harms the soul. You talk Masters of the Air and you see just how affected everybody is by the experience of doing what they're doing. And it's what it is that they're doing on the ground. It's what they're experiencing up in the air. It's who it is that they're losing along the way. And it wounds the soul, damages it irreparably, probably. And so let's honor the folks that have been subjected to that and not paint them in a false light based upon current understandings of their experience. Poor folks that didn't get their recognition when it was due.
Yeah, totally so. I mean, interestingly, and I don't want to do a resume of all my previous podcasts, but very recently, I did one with a chap called John Peters, who in Gulf War I was a Tornado pilot, a Tornado GL1 pilot, got shot down, very unfortunately, on his first operational mission, doing what was a daylight raid onto an airfield in Iraq, which was clearly not the best of plans, and he talks about that. But he then spent 7 weeks as a guest of Saddam Hussein's forces, and it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. It's a really, really brutally honest and very emotional account of his time in captivity. But the interesting thing, and the point of the story really, is for him, he views it now, he describes it as it was a gift that put me in a place where I kind of went to the darkest place I could possibly go, and then come back from that to do what he now does, which is what we do really, which is build people's leadership capacity and do all that kind of work. And it was absolutely fascinating to hear that kind of perspective where, you often hear people talking about post-traumatic stress and all the things that happen that are negative about it. But certainly for him, and I dare say for plenty of other people, it was an enabler as much as it was awful at the time. So it is really interesting. But we digress, Cujo.
Yeah,
we're here to talk about you and what you've done, and we're off down a huge rabbit hole already.
I love it.
Hey, so let's start with a question that I'm sure particularly for my British listeners they're keen to know about: call signs. But we don't really do call signs, in a major way. It's sort of touched us occasionally, and a few people have dabbled with it, and we have nicknames and things. But for you guys, I know it's a lot more of a sort of formal process. So I'm interested in how you got Cujo and what the backstory is, but then actually just a little bit about how the whole process works as well, because I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, excellent. Let's talk process, only because you'll be disappointed with the answer on Cujo. So historically, I'd say Vietnam was the last of the pre-call sign era. You had nicknames there for sure. But then somewhere between the Vietnam War and Desert Storm is where the formal call sign tradition begins. And I don't know exactly when it was, but you just kind of look at it, and it was the Desert Storm folks that went in with assigned call signs. And then it came down to different tribes have their own way of doing those things. So an A10 unit's going to do a call sign ceremony different from an F15 unit. I can speak to the F15 side of this. And the way that we've evolved it in the F-15 world is that you show up at your very first operational fighter squadron. You're a brand new wingman, so you're qualified to fly with a flight lead and do as told, but you're not yet qualified to go downrange into combat. And so you're going to spend probably about 6 months going through your combat mission ready qualifications, basically demonstrating to the folks that you're going to deploy with that you can be trusted to do your job properly. And at the point where you are qualified as a combat mission ready wingman, that's when the squadron is going to have a naming ceremony for you. And for us, it's a formal thing. It starts around, we'll call it 16:30 in the afternoon, and it's going to go through the evening, conducted in the squadron bar. There may be adult libations involved, and it's really an opportunity for the for the tribe to tell stories about you and to see how you respond. And what we're really looking for, and this is just a heads up to anybody that ends up being named in an F-15 or F-22, we're really looking for is for the namee to not respond at all, to just basically go along with whatever the flow is and demonstrate some humility that might be hard to come by when the kinds of stories are told about you that are told. And the threshold for truth of the stories that are told in these things is the story has to be at least 10% true.
Nice. 10%.
10%. That's the threshold. So
Okay,
it's a very low bar. And so, the tribe starts telling stories. And it's one of the funnest things to experience, because with that 10% truth threshold, the stories are almost impossibly untrue. And we watch the young namee sit there and take it. Some of them try to push back and challenge, and that never works out. And so what we can say about my call sign ceremony is that I did not challenge. I did not try to influence. When given the opportunity to weigh in, I chose not to. I just did a toast to my squadron every time that I was given the opportunity to speak. They responded very favorably to that. We went through the night, and somewhere early Saturday morning, they came up with potential call signs tied to the stories that were told. They whittled it down to 2 options. They asked me which I preferred. I said, to all of you, they loved it and they named me Cujo. I just can't tell you I can't tell you why. There has to be a degree of mystery in the F-15 community. We do not tell the stories tied to our call sign. Unless you were there, you don't know why.
I love it. We had, when I was commanding my squadron here in the UK on the Jaguar, we had an F-16 guy actually who was USAF exchange. And we called him, because he looked just like Buzz Lightyear, we called him Buzz. Everybody called him Buzz. And when he was leaving, he was really hoping to go back to the US and keep Buzz as his call sign, because he confessed to us that, again, on a night when, to use your expression, some adult libations were involved, that actually his call sign had been Slushy because he wasn't quite ice. I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. Yeah, just perfect.
Oh, that's so much fun.
Fabulous guy.
And I tell you, for us, like, different communities, there is an opportunity to change a call sign. F-15, it stays with you for life. And when you take a look at some of our 4-star generals and you look at their formal U.S. Air Force email addresses, it's callsign.lastname@us.af.mil, which tells you how seriously it's taken. Oh,
yeah. When I was in the Pentagon in 2011, I mean, I worked very closely with a guy I'm sure you know, Killer Quast.
That's right.
And that was on his door. That's absolutely what he had. So I totally get that. Very, very seriously taken, and always a subject of interest for us. That's for sure.
And if you think about it, Bob, I mean, like from my vantage point, I'm still wearing my call sign as a 50-some-odd-year-old, grown adult who's not actually flying high-performance fighter aircraft any longer. It made such an impression on me that this group of people who I held in such high regard since I was just a wee tot, that they actually made me one of them at a point where I hadn't demonstrated any sort of real proficiency. I hadn't been downrange with them. I hadn't actually done anything for real. But the fact that they were willing to say, "You're one of us now," that struck such a chord with this guy that I prefer Cujo over my actual given name, Robert or Rob, any day of the week. And that's how I'm known, and I will honor that until the day that I die. I still hold those who slip the surly bonds in high regard, those who are willing to put everything on the line every single day, training mission, combat mission, it doesn't matter, doing what's right, to protect the nation. The fact that they made me one of them, I'll always be Cujo, period, dot.
Yeah, and I totally get that, and I think it gets under your skin as well. I mean, the whole when people ask me what do I miss about the Air Force, the answer is always the people. 100% it's the people. I think there's lots of things that were fantastic. I loved my nearly 35 years doing what I did. I have amazing memories of lots of different things, but fundamentally it was about the people that I work with at every level and all the way through, because that is what makes it such a special organization to be part of. And I think that translates right across, as you say, the NATO alliance and beyond, to be honest, in all the different partnerships that we saddle up with. There's a common bond there somehow that really strikes a chord, which is never more aptly demonstrated than when there are lots of adult libations involved in a multinational bar and on exercises. And some of those are truly terrifying, and definitely stories that should stay where they were. And not
100% correct.
In doing your sort of career summary, you got as far as flying the F-15, which is it's a legendary airplane. It's still around and doing incredible stuff. But I know that you then went on beyond that. Talk us through the rest of that journey and where you ended up next, because that's a subject I definitely want to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I was one of the. I continued to be very, very fortunate throughout my career. I got a chance to go to the Air Force Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. I got a chance to go and learn from the best in our business how to be the best that I could possibly be at employing the F-15. Got called back to teach there. And having been in a command position a couple of times, I would say that as much as I honored commanding and what a huge deal that was, the highest honor that I've ever been given was being asked to come back and teach at the Fighter Weapons School. And those 2.5 years were so formative for me. They did so much for me just in terms of overall learning, and just to be associated with that institution for us is such a big deal. So I got a chance to be part of that. That'll always be part of me now until the day that I die. And then because of the credibility that I got from having gone through that program later on, when we started to scale back our F15 program, I got a chance to fly the mighty F22 Raptor and to command an F22 squadron. And I must say that was a jolt. That was an amazing experience. That was something that I cannot adequately describe to you how incredible it was.
Interestingly, I mean, for the listeners out there, we record this stuff, or I record this stuff on Zoom, so I have a video link, but actually only ever put out the audio. But I'm watching your smile, which is kind of touching the edges of the screen as you talk about the F22. So we'll definitely come on and talk about that a bit more.
Such an incredible platform. I mean, just jaw-droppingly amazing. And then came across the pond over to Europe, spent a little bit of time in Stuttgart, Germany. And while I was there, which was supposed to have really just been a touch and go back into the F22, I unfortunately came down with, or at least at that point was diagnosed with colorectal cancer that had been growing for a while. And that's going to take me off the path that I wanted to be on into the direction that was a little bit fuzzy for a while, and then has then clarified itself into teaching what you and I experienced in the fighter domain, to help business leaders to be their best, to build the kinds of teams that win in disruption, the same way that you and I are familiar with, which ends up being a magnificent part of this journey and something that I'm incredibly grateful for, and happy to talk about any and all of this with you.
Thank you for that. And let's come back to that kind of transition moment and the medical moment, because I think there's a sort of serious resilience question around that. But just before we do that, we've got to do one for the flying geeks. I mean, the F-22 bit, I was lucky enough to fly the Typhoon. And I was the first one when we were bringing Eurofighter Typhoon into service. I think we rightly thought that it was a magnificent aeroplane, probably the like of which we'd never really had before, and in terms of overall capability. And it's proved to be that. It's grown into an absolutely incredible aircraft now. But even then, we were looking at the F-22 going, yeah, okay, but it's not an F-22. And so you flew and commanded a squadron with the aeroplane that I think was clearly the dominant aeroplane on the planet, really, never been sold to anybody else, just operated by the US. Within the bounds of what you can say, give us a bit of a lowdown on capability and what it does, because it's just an extraordinary aircraft.
I'll come back and say Eurofighter has exceeded expectations, and it is a brilliant platform. And
no question. Yeah.
There's no doubt whatsoever. And it's just neat that both you and I, at a sort of later stage in our career, got a chance to be at the forefront of our respective air forces, and that, what a gift that was for me, for sure. I was not anticipating going the F-22 route, and then all of a sudden it happens, and I get a chance to go do it. So,
oh yeah, I mean, I was a Jaguar pilot. I was flying bombers, and then suddenly I end up commanding the base with Typhoons. I mean, how's that happen? You make your own luck to some extent in this world, but my goodness, that was definitely a seismic shift.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm flying the steam-driven F-15 with all these knobs and dials and switches, and I'm going to an all-glass cockpit with that's so much brilliant integration. The first point that I could make to you all about the F-22 is that I get a very short transition course in Panama City, Florida at Tyndall Air Force Base, because I'm a lieutenant colonel, and there's really no need to spend too much time learning the basics of flight. So I'll do some sims, and then I'll get a few rides in the Raptor, and we'll call it good. And one of the things that I had to do on one of my very few rides was to take off an afterburner. And I was actually a little bit offended by that. I'm thinking, I've taken off an afterburner every mission that I've ever flown practically. Like, why would that be a syllabus requirement? But whatever, it's in the syllabus, I've got to do it. And so I'm at sea level, and I plug in the afterburners, and no kidding, Bob. I mean, I am a couple of eye blinks into this mission, a run-of-the-mill, just normal takeoff, and I'm about to overspeed the gear. I mean, I have just put in the afterburners, and I'm looking at the airspeed, and I'm astounded by how fast I got fast. And now I'm panicking, trying to get the gear up so that I haven't oversped it and failed my transition mission on takeoff. So I just barely get the gear in on time, and I'm still accelerating. And so I just start pulling back on the stick, and the stick's in the wrong spot. And the Raptor, it's over here. It's not where it used to be in the Eagle. So I'm still coming to grips with that. And I'm pulling back, and I keep on pulling back, and I'm basically going vertical, and I'm still accelerating. And this is all within it feels like just a couple of seconds. It's probably 5 to 10 seconds into this takeoff roll. And so this is the first time in my career that I'll have to take the throttles and pull them back while I'm pointed straight up so that I don't go supersonic mere seconds after taking off.
Wow.
And it was
in the vertical.
In the vertical. And I am so astounded by all of this. It put me so far behind the airplane. I'm like, okay, now I understand why it's a syllabus requirement to do an afterburner takeoff at sea level in this sucker. And that's the way that the rest of the program was for me. Everything about that airplane is so advanced, so sophisticated. It does things that while you're doing them, you're saying to yourself, this is impossible. Like the physics involved should make this impossible. And yet you're doing it. And you add to it the stealth component, and it almost makes it unfair. You know, on a routine training mission, you can go out there and you're like, I forgot to do this, and I forgot to do this, and I didn't do this so right. But it really didn't matter, because when you're flying an invisible airplane, you're forgiven your faults. And so I went from an airplane where in the F15, you really had to be on point. You were the internal processor that was taking radio calls and looking at this screen and that screen and this other screen, and your eyeballs outside, putting all that together and making a decision about how to move. You're going from that world into this one where it's all kind of laid out for you, and you have the benefit of low observability, and you have such raw power and physics capability that I go back to, it was a little bit unfair. Training missions were a little bit unfair against the rest of our force. And it was, as a result, it was so much fun. So that airplane was just a joy. It's like flying an invisible rocket ship around the world is a lot of fun. And I was very disappointed to give it up.
I can equate to some of that. I mean, the afterburner thing with Typhoon was very impressive as well, but not quite that impressive. I mean, we would rotate to 75 degrees nose up when the seat was 15 degrees rake, so you felt 90 degrees, and you'd climb out like that. I mean, you're holding speed there, you're not accelerating, but it was still. And if you didn't have the nose way up, you were going to go supersonic. It was exactly the same. But the low observability bit, obviously, I didn't benefit from that. But what we did have was the ability to really shock the existing elements of the RAF. And we would go and do training against Hawk trainer jets, which obviously we used to use quite a lot for just evasion training and things, and doing some combat against them. And the Hawk's a very maneuverable, small airplane that's quite challenging in all sorts of ways. And the boys on the squadron just used it. It was totally, probably not very politically correct to say it, but it was drawn directly from the cruelty of it. They described it as seal clubbing, because essentially it was almost pointless. You know, you were within a couple of turns, you're sat camped in the guy's 6 o'clock and it's all over. And the other thing we were able to do was obviously put airplanes very high, and equally would then split them and put some very low. And our poor old F3 force, the Tornado F3, which was never the best airplane for doing its role, and a very good ground attack airplane, not so good in the air-to-air environment. And they were just at a loss with this. I mean, just scanning the radar volume and all the rest of it to be able to turn around and try and engage with us was really challenging. But I remember, because obviously Typhoons have come up many times since against F22s, and work with them and against them in terms of adversaries on exercises and things like that. And it is a pretty jaw-dropping, as you say, going and doing a 10v2 and losing, that kind of thing. It's just not really what you'd expect to happen.
That's exactly it. I mean, it's that initial leap, the first exposure to it, that's really so eye-opening as a young F-22 pilot. Not in terms of years flying, but just minutes flying that airplane. It was astounding how effective it was. No matter where it was that you were, and so having had to work pretty hard as an F-15 pilot to do some fraction of what the F-22 was just doing organically, it was kind of a little bit mind blowing. And then you just eventually you accept that as your new status quo, and it is such a fun thing to go out there and do. So we knew, because we didn't buy that many of them, that to be part of the F-22 program was a very, very special thing. And all of us really took that on as an honor. I mean, when I was flying it, most of us had come from someplace else. We started to get the pipeline of straight out of pilot training into F-22 world. We had a few of those pilots when I was a commander, and for them, that's all they ever knew. So this was their status quo. For the rest of us, I think we appreciated it just a little bit more because we came from someplace else, and we knew how huge of a leap it was to be able to do what we did, and what a special thing it was to get a chance to fly it. So all of us held it in very, very high regard, and still do, obviously, by virtue of the smile. And I'll be an Eagle guy until the day that I die. I'm emotionally connected to my first airplane. Felt like I was cheating on it when I started flying F-22s, but you can't argue with the success of that platform.
Oh yeah, and I'm very similar. I mean, I did 2,500 hours flying the Jaguar right through to being a squadron commander, and then got to fly the Typhoon a little bit while I was a base commander, and I feel very privileged to have done that. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, my heart was in the Jaguar. Really, it was a completely different airplane, as you say. It was take a bucket of instruments, throw them in the cockpit, and they stick where they land. And that was kind of it. And it was a completely different operating environment, very underpowered. Best air brake we had was the wing. The moment you turned, it slowed down. It was still fun to fly. I've never yet met anybody who didn't enjoy flying it. And I agree with you as well about if you're a young pilot coming onto one of these very high-tech airplanes, yeah, obviously that's the right path now. But in some ways, you've missed out a little bit on that kind of the journey and seeing just that immense step. I mean, I'm reflecting a little bit on you said right at the beginning you wanted to be Luke Skywalker flying an X-Wing fighter. You got about as close as you could, really.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And I appreciate that evolution all the more because it started in the F-15. And when I was a squadron commander, it was out at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where we had drone F4s. So we were taking them out and we were shooting them down from time to time, but we had flyable man in the seat kind of F4s. And so I got a chance to fly that one as well. And so I saw that, the F-15 to the F-22, and it was just a remarkable evolution. And all of those just great, venerable airplanes. And it's so neat to have been part of all of those programs. And then you add to it by going even further back, flying World War II era airplanes. And I'm very envious of you.
Yeah, that was fun. I did some F4 time too, actually. I did an exchange with the German Air Force flying F4s.
Brilliant.
So I had RF4Es, which were, it was a lot of fun for sure. And it's great just to see the different types. I think to get that different set of experiences was very, very valuable.
And it builds air sense. And that's something that if you're only in airplanes that do everything for you, you don't have as much of it as you had to have when you're flying low level, in Germany, in bad weather, in an F4, doing the things that you were doing. And that's one of the other things that I think is very important that we emphasize is that as we continue to evolve technologically, we have to be very careful that the person who's flying this thing still has the same degree of air sense that is needed to do so effectively and safely.
Terrific point. I mean, interestingly, I have that conversation quite regularly with my friends who are flying airliners, lots of whom, I mean, many of them are now retiring as well, but the lots, obviously, and you'll be the same, lots of friends who leave and go and jump into that route. Because I think you're right. I mean, even if I look at military airplanes, even the Jaguar, I mean, when we started flying the Jaguar back in the 1980s, and navigation system was pretty primitive and it fell over all the time and was quite problematic. By the time I finished it, you've got a Kalman filtered terrain reference and GPS and inertial nav system that's giving you basically 6 inches of accuracy almost. And interestingly, we could and we did still turn around to the young pilots and say, right, turn some of this stuff off on check rides, because it meant that you then had an inertial nav system that drifted. You had to be able to cope with that. You had to turn around and still be able to navigate and do all the stuff that we still required them to be able to do, even when the stuff was going badly wrong. In the Typhoon, and I'm sure it's probably exactly the same in the airplanes you were flying, whether it's F-15 or F-22, we got to the point where you can't turn this stuff off. It's just built into the system, and therefore you've got what you've got, and there's no sense at all that you would go and try and navigate somewhere without the nav system working, because the airplane just doesn't work without it. And that is, I mean, I suppose we're sounding like a couple of old dinosaurs saying this, but it does actually, I think it is not necessarily the best for giving you really real chips down flying ability. Chelsea Sullenberger landing on the Hudson, would that have been the same if he'd always been an airline pilot and had the limited amount of actual flying that the airline pilots get? Or did it make a difference that actually he had all that kind of previous military experience?
Exactly.
I mean, we'll never know, but I think I've got a pretty good idea of the answer in my own head.
And I tell you, one of the things we benefited from at Holloman was my boss, Colonel Stapleton, who was a great group commander, as we were getting rid of, I think we were down to 7 remaining black painted T-38 Talons. So twin engine supersonic jet trainer, used to train the NATO alliance, used to train U.S. Air Force pilots. He said, "Hey, let's keep these things here, and let's create an opportunity to train against ourselves with a small airplane that's kind of harder to see." And so we did that. We created this little in-house adversary program there, which ends up being super fun. So we get a chance to fly two different airplanes at the same time, and it was an opportunity to kind of maintain some basic pilot proficiency, because we go from an airplane that's got all of the sophisticated, fancy stuff back to an airplane that was designed in the 50s, and it's representative of what you and I are most familiar with as we were growing up in aviation. And so we'd go zipping across New Mexico, flying those little suckers around, and that was actually really good for us. We'd take them on the road, and we'd go fly cross country, cost effective, but more importantly, required us to be able to do the aviation stuff that we learned in pilot training, because that was the only thing that we had. And that was a good thing for us. So tip my cap to Colonel Stapleton and for giving us that gift.
Which is a fabulous segue, because I always like to talk about role models. And so role models and influencers for you, I mean, through really whole career, who are the people that really stood out for you that have shaped your thinking and what you do?
Yeah, I'd say as a collective whole, I was very, very privileged to work for outstanding squadron commanders who I label as outstanding because they were technically and tactically proficient, which is really, really important. And they were able to lead very effectively. Like, they knew how to build a team, and they knew how to get us ready for what it was that we had to do. They knew when to push, when to kind of throttle back. They knew how to have a fun experience doing the work that we did, and they made sure that we had fun. And so I would say that I was very, very fortunate to have outstanding squadron commanders throughout the entirety of my flying career who gave me insight into what right looked like. I also simultaneously had a slew of great weapons officers, so graduates of our fighter weapons school who were the chief tacticians in our squadrons, who were responsible for making sure that everybody was combat ready and that we were all able to push our own limits to the limit and, essentially arrive at who it is that we could be. And I had several weapons officers who took me under their wing and really poured everything that they could into me. Like, for example, gentleman who's now a retired colonel, at the time that he was a weapons officer, Captain Terry Stretch Scott. And he taught me how to dogfight. He taught me how to do the things that you always have to know how to do, no matter how sophisticated your weapon system is, because at the end of the day, something can still get through. And if you can't, in a visual arena, win against that, then it's a bad day. So, I mean, that was very, very important for me. But I had so many of these weapons officers who influenced me and showed me what right looks like. And so I'd say collectively, our weapons school did a great job of teaching people to teach me, and did such a good job of that they actually got me qualified to go and become a student there, and then eventually teach as well. So that whole weapons officer thing, it really made a profound impact on me. Now, that's kind of a general answer, so I don't know if that meets your...
No. I think and it's a good answer. I think, interestingly, I tend to say in a lot of the training I do with people these days, my own personal leadership model, if you like, I metaphorically have two jars. I have a jar of things I really like from people I've really seen along the way, and stuff that I've actually done that I thought worked quite well, and things I've seen other people do that I think is, I'll emulate that. That's a really good thing. And a lot of those are people I've worked for or around or seen alongside me somewhere. But I've also got another jar, which is actually stuff that I don't like. And it's either mistakes I've made, it's people I've worked with or around and have seen them do things that I think are, frankly, I never want to see that, tolerate that amongst my team or anything else. And so, I think generally, if I look across my military career, I would have far more in the kind of positives than the negatives. But inevitably, there are some, both in the military side and outside it, that you look at and you go, yeah, I'm going to take some stuff from that is definitely in that I don't ever want to see this again bucket. And I guess it's pretty similar for you. So yeah.
It is, and that's where it's really interesting, because the concentration of this is what I want to emulate bucket came from my time in fighter squadrons. When I left the fighter squadron, when I was in different jobs, maybe I saw a little bit more smattering of the things that I may not want to emulate as much. The fighter squadrons tended to be, and I don't want to put it on too high of a pedestal because I know that we had our flaws, but there was just something about it where I think, generally speaking, we were getting it right. And the atmosphere there was so special that you always look forward to coming back. I think to my favorite assignments, they were always the squadron assignments. And though the flying part was such a joy, I mean, that was the thing that you and I were most jazzed about. We did that the least, right? I mean, it might be an hour here and then an hour there. Maybe flew a couple, 3 times a week. I don't know how often you flew the Eurofighter. We didn't fly the Raptor all that much. So you're spending most of your time in a squadron not flying, but you're interacting with all these other people that have this same shared fascination with aviation, and you're in the simulator and you're doing things to prepare. And there was something about the way that we organized that made it fun to come to work. And I talk to people, and they, Sunday night they're dreading it, and like, oh, I got to go back to work on Monday. And you see what people post on things. You're like, oh, not enough coffee to get through Monday. And I was all amped. I was actually at work on Sunday, getting ready to come in and lead my mission on Monday. And, and as the week went by, it just seemed like time went by really, really fast. And that's the special thing about these organizations that you and I were part of. It was fun to go to work.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting, and it's definitely maybe something I want to loop back to in a minute as well, because you've written a book called Debrief to Win. I've talked about the power of debriefing on a podcast as well, because I think one of the things, without taking a deep dive into it just yet, I think one of the things that was very good in the flying environment was our integrity, our ability to literally take the rank off, and if you were leading a formation as the squadron commander, you would basically take the hits just as much as anybody else if you'd done stuff that wasn't appropriate, or something had gone wrong and it was your fault. And you'd be absolutely expected to be fronting up with that in an honest, open way to maximize the learning for everybody else and minimize the risk of stuff going wrong on another occasion. And regrettably, I think in lots of other walks of life, including actually sometime in the military and in other bits, as I've seen, that's not necessarily the case. That same culture is not so pervasive. And that, I think, to your point, I think that's part of why that is a very special environment, because you have that completely honest culture that is really, really useful.
It is. And we started off talking Top Gun. In Top Gun Maverick, which I think is an amazing movie, and I've seen it 6 times, and it still moves me to tears. It's that good, and I'm so happy that it is. I was really hoping that they wouldn't, flub it. In that movie, there's one big mistake, and somehow the Department of the Navy allowed it to make its way through. Tom Cruise's character Maverick says, "I'm not a teacher," and I'm like, man, they actually, whoever they are, the sum total of everybody that approved this film missed the mark completely with that one statement. You, in order to fly the Jaguar, had to be an outstanding teacher, because you had to teach your teammates how to learn from this experience, today's experience, to make the next one better. If you couldn't
100%.
do that, then you could not be effective as a flight lead. And that's exactly what's wrong with that statement. Not only is he a flight lead and an instructor, but he's a Navy Top Gun graduate. He's the best teacher that the Navy has, and if he can't teach, he doesn't earn the right to wear that patch. And that was the thing about it. Like, for us, we were constantly in a learning posture. Like, we went every day to go learn. Every single day. You, at the end of your career, the last mission that you ever flew, you went into with a learning posture. Because there's always a chance that something and you had to come back, whatever. So you went in there to learn how to be better than you, and you went in giving your all, knowing that you would never be perfect, right?
Yeah, and it's one of the things I think corporates, in my experience, certainly this side of the Atlantic, don't do very well. I think that the reality is a lot of the time they're very busy. They'll jump from one thing to the next thing and they'll move seamlessly to that. They don't do the debrief bit. They don't turn around and go, okay, how do we learn from what we've just done? How do we review it? How do we pick the bones out of it and decide how we should change our standard operating procedures if we should? Whether there are any safety points that came from it, whether there's anything we just behaved badly in this area, et cetera, et cetera. And I think every single sortie I flew, and you'll be the same, even in a single seat airplane, and you were the same as me. You're flying single seat airplanes your whole career. Even if it's just on your own going and doing a singleton mission, you come back and you debrief it mentally, if nothing else. In a formation, you formally debrief it. So you'll spend a significant chunk of time taking it apart and putting it back together again to actually look at what's gone on. And I think that is it's a luxury we have, I suppose, in terms of the time and ability to do that. But it's also something that I think any organization should and could do much better to really be in a kind of positive, how are we making ourselves more efficient? And it's seen, in my view, too often as an overhead, where actually in reality it's not. It's an absolute benefit if you're if you're going to be able to do that and then repeat what you did most effectively multiple times and continue to iteratively improve it as you go along.
That's exactly right. And the only reason that it's kind of a luxury for us is that we've made it such. Like we've decided, both of our air forces have, that this is such an imperative that we will always carve out time for it. Doesn't matter if the combat mission lasts 14 and a half hours. The next stop, once we get back down on the ground, is to debrief that 14 and a half hour combat mission efficiently. I mean, we're not going to spend 24 hours talking about it because we have probably another combat mission tomorrow, but it's going to be very efficient and effective to help us to learn from this experience to have a better one next time. It's so mission critical that even there we will make the time for it.
Yeah, mercifully, my Air Force was slightly different in terms of the length of missions. We didn't go down that route in the fast jet world anyway. And I did some long trail missions, but not nothing on the scale that you've probably done.
No, I haven't. Listen, I watched a Strike Eagle crew come back one day when we were deployed in Saudi Arabia, and they had been on a 14 and a half hour mission total, and they had to divert at the end of it into our base. And these poor guys, they were just ashen. They were just so drained. They looked like living zombies. And I felt so bad for them. And all they wanted to do was find a cot or piece of floor anywhere and just fall asleep for a while. And mercifully, I never had to personally do it that long. But even then, they had to debrief before they found that cot, right? 100%. Because that's needed.
That's the discipline as well. But,
it is the discipline.
On the amusing stories front, I heard a slightly anecdotal, but a great story about the B-2, where they were doing one of their extraordinarily long missions, and they were on the tanker somewhere off New York before they went way east to go and do a mission that was more than a day long. And they came back and they were tanking off the same tanker crew on the way back in, and the guy who was the boom operator on the tanker was giving them a bit of banter about being home and had played with the kids and a meal with the wife, had a good night's sleep. Now he's back and they're still airborne.
So cruel. So cruel.
Oh my goodness.
That is one mission set that I do not think I had the capacity to go do. I liked my 1.0s. I really did. I feel like my body was kind of designed for that. It accepted it well. It bounced back effectively. I could do several 1.0s on the same day. That would be okay. The longer missions crossing the Pacific, for example, that was not as fun. And to imagine doing that for 24 hours. Now, where we did push it was at the weapons school, where we would debrief so airborne for an hour, but really 35 minutes worth of tactical execution. We would debrief that, depending on what phase we were in, 19 solid hours. So we would really dig, because we only had 5.5 months to teach our class everything that we could teach them. And so we would, again, it was depending on phase of flight. For sure, when it came to learning the basics of tactical intercepts, we would spend a lot of time in the debrief. And that's whoever it is leading it is standing the entire time.
Yeah, that's challenging. Yes. I can see that. Changing tack a bit, back to you as an individual. You alluded to this earlier. Your Air Force career was sadly cut short by a cancer diagnosis. Again, within the bounds of what you're happy to talk about. How did you handle that? For anyone in your world, my world, where you are, you're at the peak of physical fitness, doing that kind of job. You go through medicals all the time. You just kind of live for tomorrow. You're immortal. You know that you've got all this stuff to do and these opportunities ahead of you. I'm just interested in, from a personal point of view, how you handled finding that out and then dealt with it and put yourself on a path that has clearly been immensely successful to where you are now.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Bob. This is really important, I think. Give you a little bit of additional context before I answer that question. I had some symptoms that I shared with my bride. She said, we need to go talk to a doctor about this. I said, don't worry. I have my annual flight physical coming up, and I'll mention it to the doctor there. And I did, which for me was an evolution. As a lieutenant colonel, I was more prone to talk about medical things than I was as a captain back when I was indestructible and bulletproof. And I talked to the doc, and he's like, hey, listen, you're young, you're fit, you're fine. And I'm like, sounds good. And when I told my bride that I'm good to go, she's like, no, you're not. We need to get a second opinion. I'm like, well, I'm good with where we are right now. And anyway, so she pushes me in the direction of second opinion. I'll drag my legs a little bit, but then eventually, fine. All right, just to placate, I'll go get a second opinion. I did. And the second doctor said the same thing. You're young, you're fit, you're fine. But then he added this caveat. He said, I'll be criticized if I don't give you a referral to go get this thing checked. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, this is just a waste of money. I mean, he's only doing this because he's going to be criticized by I don't know who. And so again, I'm happy with the result. She's not happy with this at all. And she calls up my former flight surgeon who worked for me when I was a squadron commander, who is now technically out of the regular Air Force. And he calls me up and says, hey, boss, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, hey, listen, I'm not your boss any longer. And you haven't called me in a long time. So I suspect my wife is conspiring with you. And if that's the case, then potentially you're a traitor. So just be very careful about what it is that you're about to tell me. And he's like, yeah, I hear you, boss. But I really need you to go get this thing checked out. And so long and short of it is the third opinion is the one where even though I called him a traitor, causes me to go, well, maybe I should. And the night before I had this thing checked out, before I had my colonoscopy, I did a toast with some Stuttgarter Hofbräu saying this is the stupidest thing that I'm ever going to do in my life. And when it comes back clean, I'm going to laugh at everybody here. And I'm talking to my wife and my kids. All right. I wake up from the colonoscopy and the doctor says, I'm so sorry, Herr Teschner, but I've got to inform you that I found a huge tumor growing in your lower colon. He says, I suspect it's been growing for a decade.
Wow. And
it just took all the wind out of my sails. In fact, I had this little movie clip that I had set up where I was going to put in my wife's face and highlight, how foolish this whole thing was and look at how right I was. And I had enough sense to put the phone down and put this thing away. And I was just stunned. And my wife, 6 months pregnant with our fourth child, the day that we find out that this tumor's been growing for a decade, and we have to wait 5 days to get the biopsy results back for her. So there's the full context.
Wow.
And the very first, and this is say it's 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm starving because I've been doing the colonoscopy prep. And so we leave the doctor's office in this daze. And the first thing I suggest is that we go downstairs and have some lunch because I don't want to die hungry. So I'm starving. She's 6 months pregnant, so she's also hungry. And so even though we've just gotten this horrible bit of news, we're going to go downstairs to the bottom floor of this facility and have some food. So there's not a lot of conversation in the elevator. We go to the cafe. Because of the time of day, there's just not many people there. In fact, I think we're the only people in there. So as soon as we place our order, it's just the two of us alone. And what happens next is pure instinct, driven by the life that you and I were privileged to lead. So how did we respond to this? The first thing that I tell my wife as the fog is starting to clear a little bit and I start to think is this. I said, honey, just want you to know one thing. Our story just got better. And it came out, it was just instinct to say it. And then she responded with, I agree. And it was basically an acknowledgement that a massive disturbance had just hit. And it's not something that either of us wanted. Just like when we're out there flying and all of a sudden we get a master caution light and some horrible indication that we've just lost something that's life critical. We don't panic. We don't sit there and go, oh, there's no hope, eject now and, throw care to the wind. We're like, nope, we're going to do everything we can to land this thing safely. And when we dominate, no matter how bad this thing is right now, the story that we get to tell is going to be that much better than if everything had gone exactly according to plan. That's the ethos that you and I lived every single day of our flying lives. And that was the moment that I really needed it. It percolated to the top. It caused me to say what I said. And the two of us, mindset-wise, we're in alignment. We're going to do everything that we can to make this a reality. We're going to maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take appropriate action, and land as soon as conditions permit.
What age were you when all this happened, Cujo?
Oh, 39.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's
So I
tough.
was young.
That's a tough diagnosis at that age, isn't it?
I was young. I was a very fit. I mean, I had just given up an F-22 squadron a few months prior, and I was getting ready to go back to the F-22. So I was ready to go. So it came out of left field. It was not expecting anything like this. Necessitates two horrific GI surgeries that fundamentally reshape who I am, changes the way that my life works. It's harder these days to do the basic things because I have a semi-undependable, not very predictable system any longer. And my surgeon said that I would rip apart from the inside at 9 times the force of gravity. So it kind of took flying F-22s off the table, at least for a bit.
I can imagine that.
But if you just think about it, it's so true, though. Like the mental attitude, the orientation that we took into our previous roles is necessary no matter what it is that you do. Nothing ever goes exactly according to plan. In fact, many of our plans are completely OBE the moment that we step out the door. And yet you knew for the entirety of your flying career that you were going to still find a way to achieve mission success. I knew that no matter what happened to us up there, I was still going to find a way to achieve mission success. And we're going to do so with gusto. Right? We weren't going to ever play the role of a victim. We were never going to sit there and say, well, we couldn't get the bombs on target because the winds got too out of it was too hard. Things didn't. No, that would be 100% unacceptable in any organization that you ever flew with, that I ever flew with. And so because of that orientation, we were ready.
No, you're 100% right. And I mean, nothing so serious in terms of medical health. But I mean, I had a major drama a good few years ago, and I did a lot of scuba diving, and I very short story, I ran out of air at 60 meters on a decompression dive. Entirely my fault. I'd screwed up. We were doing a lot of drills and bits and pieces, and I'd got nitrogen narcosis, was blurring my thoughts a bit as well. And I had a couple of of cylinders of rich mixed oxygen, but they're toxic at that depth. And I am convinced, I mean, and obviously I survived. I'm talking to you now, and I won't go through the rest of the story, but I mean, I'm convinced that the reason I survived was because of my military training. And the not panic, think it through, work the problem, solve one thing, solve another thing, and actually get to that point. So I totally get what you're saying. I mean, luckily for me, it was a much less kind of invasive personal thing that you then had to deal with. I mean, reaction-wise for you, I mean, obviously that's a great initial response, but then it must have been gut-wrenching to obviously, literally, to lose a very buoyant career and all the rest of it. How did you find that transition? Did you have any kind of hangover from all of that?
Yeah, I think the transition was rough. It was probably too accelerated by me because once I made the decision, all right, it's done. I was all in on whatever the next phase was going to be, and I didn't really think through the steps that were going to take me into that next phase. And the U.S. Air Force was so kind to me. They were willing to do anything that I wanted to do. They were going to support me retiring early. They were going to support me staying in. They were going to support me medically. So I had that benefit, and I kind of didn't take advantage of it. And I put myself in a really tough spot very, very quickly. Gave up being a colonel, full bird colonel in the Air Force, retired early, became a lieutenant colonel, took a job in a startup without really much context of what it would take to get this thing to start. The startup never started. And in short order, I found myself as a mortgage loan officer, just trying to sell people over the phone mortgage loans, folks who did not ever want to speak to a loan officer. Like they had accidentally placed their information on some website and now are getting punished for it. I was typically the 37th person to call them and they had nothing for me. So I've gone from next stop in my career evolution is back to the F-22 as the senior Air Force leader to trying to convince people over the phone to do business with me in an industry that I know nothing about. And that was all my fault. Like I did not handle my transition out of the Air Force well at all. But took as much as I could from all of these experiences and learned along the way, what does it take to be okay at business? What does it take to sell? What do you need in order to be successful as a small business owner? What do you need to be successful leading a team in business? What I found was there were so many parallels between this business world and the world that I came from. The risk, the reward, the leadership components necessary, the importance and imperative of accountability. And it inspired me to take action on something that had occurred to me decades prior, back when I was teaching at the weapons school. place where I thought we were really accelerating leadership and teamwork development at a pace that folks cannot understand unless they've been through it. And taking and applying all of that into the world of business. I said, okay, I'm seeing the need for it, and I have the solution to the problems that I'm seeing. It's now time to take action on it. So in an interesting way, the poor way that I exited myself from the Air Force and the things that I experienced as a result of that paved the way for me to start doing the thing that I think was actually my reason for being on Earth, harnessing the previous life as a fighter pilot to do good in the world of business. And looking back on it, I'm grateful for the entirety of it, even the painful parts. Wouldn't have written the story that way, but I'm so glad that I experienced it all, came through it all, and I'm now here to be able to deploy the learning that I've gathered from all of this. And it's been incredibly rewarding. So it's been, at the end of the day, a magnificent transition into doing something that I absolutely love. I get to go back and teach again, which is what a fighter pilot is. A teacher, first and foremost and always. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I mean, all credit to you, I think, to turn it around from a pretty dark spot. And I mean, obviously compounding the medical issue to then end up in, as you say, even if it was your fault, you end up in that situation where you're in, oh my God, what have I done? I've kind of blown my transition out to now doing what you do. And I mean, just talk a bit about the VMax Group and what you do, because I think that'd be really interesting. And in doing that, what I'd be interested in you doing as well is kind of unpacking a little bit your own leadership style, how you've changed, how you're shaping that into the corporate world.
Yeah. So these days we take and we've adapted all the tools that you and I both use to be effective as fighter pilots, the team life cycle, how it is we plan, how it is that we communicate the plan, how it is we adapt the plan in execution to the reality of what we're up against, how it is that we learn post-mission execution to have a better mission the next day. We've adapted all that to the world of business, and we help organizations to implement it. What has happened is that as a consequence of the turbulence that I've gone through, I took some time to try to figure out how come the previous life was so effective at building teams and building leadership. And I documented all of that in the first book I wrote, Debrief to Win. And then I built programs around the book to help organizations to implement it. And as I started to go do that, what ends up happening is that people from our previous tribe started reaching out and saying, Cujo, I'm following you. I love what you're doing. I totally agree with it. There's a need for it. I'd love to come join you in doing it. And so I've actually grown a team that goes out here and teaches all of this implementation. And as a result of having a team, we can scale the implementation of all of these things. Then we get a chance to see how effective what it is that we're doing is in these organizations. And those organizations keep on coming back to us. And so it's led to this environment now where our mission is to teach everything that we know, everything that we've learned, everything that we've extracted from the previous life into the world of business, where it's so desperately needed. And it's so satisfying and fulfilling that we just keep on adding to our team. So we just keep on getting bigger and bigger.
How many have you got?
Right now, we've got 8 people that are out there formally teaching what it is that we teach, and we've got a big bullpen that continues to grow, or a lineup of people that are waiting to come on board.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So that's been a true joy, and seeing the effectiveness. I mean, because it's all about effectiveness. For you and me, the mission was about achieving desired effects. We had to achieve mission success defined by achieving our objectives. If we didn't do it, then we were not effective. Same thing here. And what we're seeing is that when we accelerate leadership and when we inculcate teams with the ability to team effectively, we achieve desired effects. Businesses grow, they do the things that they're out there to do. And it has to be that way, because businesses, small businesses, especially backbone of our respective economies, got to have a strong economy to afford a strong defense. So it's all interwoven.
Fascinating. And I mean, I see very much the same thing over this side as well. I think there's plenty of opportunity to do that. I think one of the challenges is often breaking into the market a little bit, because a lot of training in particular here quite often is the first thing that gets axed when times are tight. Say, okay, well, let's not do that. let's save a bit of cash by not doing that training thing.
That's right. And
inevitably that means it's tough on the trainers, but it's also obviously it's sad because the organizations don't necessarily benefit from it. And I think and when I left the Air Force, I joined Deloitte, and one of the things I was doing at Deloitte was crisis management. And it was very interesting that the leaders in organizations who had been through some kind of crisis were the ones who actually were much the most receptive to saying this was really valuable and we should do this and we shouldn't just skip it and find a way to avoid it and treat it as an overhead, because they kind of saw it for what it actually was. And I think the same thing is true to some extent with leadership training. There's a lot of almost accidental leaders in organizations. They've got there because they've been promoted, and some of them are very good at it, for sure. Some of them less so. And the sad thing is they've never really had the benefit of a world, which in the military world is one that does it, where you actually get that kind of really fantastic training opportunity over a very long period of time that gives you not only the basis to do it, but also the opportunity to actually do it and make a real difference to people.
That's right.
What are the kind of things you see typically? I mean, in your day to day, what kind of issues are you seeing in organizations? Is what I've said similar, or is it different over your side?
100%. It's the exact same thing. I think that the world of business is the same on both sides of our shared pond here. Also seeing low employee engagement. I'm seeing a lot of folks who, when confronted with you're not doing your job right, are 100% defensive from the very get-go and point fingers elsewhere and don't take ownership of the issue. Disparity, and if you just take a look at what Gallup is reporting, disparity between what managers are saying is happening at the team level and what the team is saying about whether those managers are delivering on what it is that they're saying. Huge gap there. And ultimately, you have frustrated individuals who know that even if you're winning, you're not winning the way that you're supposed to be doing. You have people that are doing disproportionately more to achieve mission success than the teammates who they're relying on. So they're doing other people's jobs because they're not doing it correctly. Different standards for different people, and it's frustrating, very frustrating. And what's interesting to me is that there's, on this side of the pond, probably the same on your side of the pond, an idea that the military is this command and control style organization where
I hate this. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. All you guys do is bark orders and people obey.
I'm like, oh, come spend a day with us. Come spend a day. Understand how seriously we take this whole teamwork development thing. Come see a real human team do human stuff together, and you'll be blown away by it. And so a lot of what we have to do is to dispel some of the pre-existing notions of what the truth is, and then break through and show what's possible. And then once an organization has seen the realization of what right could look like, it's an easy thing to move forward with. And folks don't appreciate the fact your government has poured more into leadership development than any company in the UK. My government has poured more into leadership development than any company in the United States. Why? Because we have to be able to lead in the things that we do. And we have to have teammates that rise to the occasion and team well in combat, under fire, where the pressure is high and the stakes are tremendous. And so we do know a lot about this.
Yeah, and so I tend to describe it as almost an upside down model as well, because if you look at the corporate world, people employ you because of your qualifications and or your experience, and they promote you because of your business delivery. So if you're doing what's required, if you're selling well, or you just happen to be very effective at, if you're in the mortgage loan bit, if you're pushing lots of mortgage loans, you're going to get successful, you're going to get promoted. It's got nothing to do with what leadership skills you've got. And I've worked with people plenty of times who say, they suddenly find themselves in a job where they're running a team of people and they haven't got a clue how to do it because no one's given them those tools. Whereas one of the things we had is it's the other way around. The first thing you do is start learning to lead people. And then on top of that, you teach people to do what you actually want them to do in the service. So in our case, flying airplanes. Whereas all corporates will turn around and take in the raw material, teach them what they want to do in the business. And leadership, if there's any leadership training, it's sporadic and variable in quality. There are some organizations I think are getting a lot better at it as they start to recognize that it's more important, and coaching and things like that. I mean, coaching, certainly here, people talk about having a coach 15 years ago. Well, what's wrong with you? Why do you need a coach?
Yeah, that's right.
And whereas I think we're kind of over that. I mean, people are actually in the, okay, it's a good thing to have that. And it's a good thing to have someone who actually develops you and helps you and challenges you and gets some better thinking out of you. But it is still a process that's a work in progress, I think.
100%. Yeah.
There's some questions I always ask on these things, and you've been very generous with your time. I don't want to take too much more of it. I think the highs and lows is one of them, and what you do differently. Talking to an F22 pilot who's then had to exit the Air Force with cancer, I kind of guess that the highs and lows might be somewhere in there. But I mean, is there, I guess, wrapping it all together, is what's the most memorable bit for you? What's the real high point? What's the real low point?
Yeah, good. High point was finishing the weapons school, graduating that program with 5 of the closest friends that I'll ever have on this planet, making it through something that I thought was impossible coming into. The low point was giving up all of that and having to step away from the thing that I loved, not knowing exactly how the future was going to look. And yet, with all of that, the story wouldn't be what it is without those oscillations. And for sure, it wouldn't be what it is without coming through those low points and learning from it. So I come back and look at all of that as the formation that allowed me to be here today talking with you. And I see all of it as having served a fantastic purpose. And I'm grateful for it all. And whereas I used to be very limited in my thinking, I exist to be a fighter pilot. I now think I was a fighter pilot to do whatever it is that I'm supposed to be doing here. And I'm still in the process of learning my way into that. And I'm very, very joyful through it all. So, yeah, a long-winded way of saying, very, very happy to be here today. And the low points had to be part of me being here with you today.
That's a great answer. Absolutely terrific. And my final question, which I always ask everybody, is what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Most difficult question was tied to failure. What was your biggest failure? It was only difficult because there've been so many of them. It's hard to say. And I will tell you, kind of along the same lines as the oscillation, and I needed the low points to be here. I learned more from my failures than I ever did from any of my successes. And I was taught early on that failure is going to be the best teaching academy, the best learning opportunity that you have, so embrace all of it. And that really started in my fighter pilot evolution. So it was hard to answer the question about biggest failure because there were so many of them. But I will also tell you that I'm grateful for all of those as well. And maybe the biggest failure was allowing myself to get colorectal cancer. But if that hadn't happened, again, we wouldn't be speaking here today. So even that is something that I'm grateful for. So sorry for getting a little bit convoluted here at the end, but those are my answers, and I'm sticking by them.
No, there's a good answers, that's for sure. And I mean, I think it's all about life's a journey, isn't it?
It's
and you have to take the highs and lows, and you evolve along the way. And it's the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger thing, and no failure, only feedback, all these kind of rather cliched expressions, which actually are also very true, because I think that's that they most definitely do apply to an awful lot of people through life. And if you don't deal with the setbacks well, then inevitably you set the conditions for yourself in a way that you perhaps wish you hadn't. Whereas actually seeing it as, okay, this is an opportunity from whatever else has happened is a really key thing to do. And you clearly have faced that in the most extreme way with what happened to you from a health point of view. And it's great, obviously, that you've got a supportive family and so on behind you that really helps with that. I mean, undoubtedly, that makes a real difference.
It's a huge deal. My best wingman ever, ironically, is a woman who hates flying. Okay, so my wife, my bride, passionately despises flying. Brilliant wingman, saved my life and supports me in this ongoing journey. But one additional caveat that I'll add to the, failure is a part of it. The low points are a part of it. The part that was unique for you and me in the flying business was that we always strove for excellence. So it wasn't that we went out there saying, it doesn't matter, if we fail, fine, because we're going to learn from it. No. We're still going to strive to be excellent. Every day we come to work, we're going to strive to be excellent. And if we don't quite hit that mark, if there's a delta there, okay, because the effort was 100% there. We put in the effort to be excellent. Now, if we came up shy, that's where we're going to learn. But the ambition the next day is to go right back to being excellent. And that's a key factor here in all of this that people need to understand. We never aimed low. We always aimed high, period, dot.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Great way to finish as well. Cujo, we could speak for hours. I mean, yes. Typical to put two fighter pilots together. The only thing we're not in is in a bar.
That's right.
But that would just add to it. But it's a great conversation. I've absolutely loved talking to you, and I'm extremely grateful for your time. And I wish you the very best of luck.
No, thank you, Bob. The feeling is 100% mutual. Thank you so much for giving me your time today. This was a joy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cujo. Take care. All the best.
Thank you.
I really hope you've enjoyed this fabulous conversation with Cujo Teschner. I haven't had as much fun in a long time recording one of these. It's absolutely typical. Stick two fighter pilots together and they're going to have a fun time talking not least about flying, but also what an amazing life he's had and an incredible set of experiences. If you enjoyed it, then please share it. Please get this out to a wider audience and make sure that others have the opportunity to take all the great lessons that Cujo had to offer, because there's so many in there around life in general, but leadership particularly as well. So share it widely on your social media, tell your friends about it, boost the podcast, promote, do everything you can to help me get this message out there. And do me one more favor, please. It really would make a big, big difference to me to help me to continue doing this if you actually think about supporting me directly. And you can support the podcast financially by going to the support the show link that is in your podcast platform of choice. Alternatively, go to www.patreon.com/leading4life, and you'll find the show page there. And you can join as a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And it's as little as £3 a month, which will start making a huge difference as I get more supporters and more champions and more patrons to actually being able to make this show really viable into the long term, because obviously it costs time and effort and a certain amount of money as well to keep it going, and your help would make a really big difference to that. So if you're up for it, I would be tremendously grateful, but I'm grateful anyway just for your listening if you've got this far, and thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.